Hello and welcome back to the Payment Expert Podcast, your source for the latest news, insights and analysis on the payments industry. I'm Lewis Thompsett, news editor at Payment Expert, and with me today is Ignas Dovidonis, Chief AML and CTF Compliance Officer at myTU, which is an AI native digital bank from Lithuania. Ignas, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Lewis. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's kick off and talk a bit about agentic payments. It's a big talking point from across the industry over the last 1 to 2 years. They're already live. You look at the likes of some of the big card networks. They sort of run authenticated agent transactions in Asia. MasterCard, for example, even OpenAI's checkout settles on card rails. Talking about agents, I suppose broadly, what can they complete on their own today, right now, and what still needs a human to click and confirm, and what's the roadmap looking like? Do you think for perhaps in Europe, particularly with agentic payments coming in live, and particularly around e-commerce?
Yeah, so quite funny when you look like 1 year back what we could have done with AI. So probably just asking to read some document and do some short analysis or write me a script or something. Right now, after just 1 or a couple of years, we already in the agentic payment industry. So basically answering, to your question, like agentic AI could do the whole shop at the moment. It can search, it can compare, it can fill the basket, complete the checkout for you. The biggest caveat here is that, it still has to has authorization from the person here, meaning that it can do many tasks, but it must have some fundamentals or underlying authorization from the person itself. So either it would be a customer or the user of the agentic AI, and the same time the MasterCard rails and so on. And where the person comes in, so if we would look on the payment rails scale, so it's usually, still human consent, as I mentioned. So a token, a limit, or a mandate, it's still being given by the person. So let's say, I'm authorizing, to do no more than X amount per month, and this, so I set some boundaries here in this point, but also maybe going a little bit around the back here, agentic AI, why it's different. So you give intent to this point. You don't give like clear indications or whatever. You just give intent, like keep my basket always fulfilled.
Yeah, and you mentioned the rules, which is quite interesting in terms of where the rules currently sit and keeping up with what agents already do. You mentioned obviously the agent being tied to the person, but I suppose when it comes to the regulations, maybe keeping up, and that's maybe what's the biggest drawback at the minute for agentic payments, is where that lies. Does the responsibility lie with the payment processor? Does it sit with the user who's using AI? Where that, I suppose, sits at the minute is something the industry needs to figure out.
Yeah, so an agent doesn't work in a rules-based way. Usually it works in an intent way. So meaning that, as I mentioned, you give like a goal or an intent, what you want to achieve, what you want to have, but you don't explain how to achieve it. Yeah, you need to trust agentic AI for this, that he will do its job. So, let's say a customer says, keep my office supplies stocked and don't spend more than, let's say, 500 quid, yeah, at this point. So the agent then decides, the payee, the timing, and the amount. But you have not written this, it decides by its own. It just have some clear intent what to do. And so you could consider intent as a one big rule if you would like that. But we in the financial world, we would like to call it intent just to like achieve the goal here at this point. And
Sure.
about the regulation, maybe, yeah, so some gap sits in the regulation itself, I would say. The law describes consent for the specific transaction usually. So I would say that there is still some regulatory job to be done here at this point, because you are authorizing usually a single payment, not a unexpected flow of payments. So I believe the goal could be to start authorizing intents, It could be a way to go.
Yeah, sure. And you mentioned obviously, having to trust the agent, and I suppose maybe that's one point of the industry at the minute where maybe the models could be better. There are new models coming out. You look at those kind of foundational models that are coming in, which lower the hallucination risk, etc. Do you think it's a case of those newer models rolling out with those kind of less hallucinations and so having more trust in the agent to do what it's supposed to do without kind of any flaws or minimizing the
Uh,
flaws?
In our ML world, and I believe any compliance officer that is looking this podcast will have this phrase, no, regardless of anything, trust but verify. So this is the golden standard that you have to do. So, AI could be very persuasive. It could write, long speeches for you and maybe even try to sell you some things, but still, you have to verify what it writes because there might be some issues after all. You have to understand it as a simple human being. Whatever, I'm telling you, it could be some factual mistakes that I make here also, as any other person or employee working, there is a risk of making mistake. Just, I would say that the room for error is a little bit smaller compared to the human, but that's why, human decision making is so beautiful in a sense because it could arrive to some decisions that even AI could not predict that it's
Mm.
possible, to do. So there's always this balance between, what you can do and what still needs to be verified.
Yeah, and I suppose it opens the floodgates a little bit because agents can maybe do things that the regulations haven't even ruled on yet. Is there anything or any particular use cases that come to mind for you?
From from my perspective, I would say this authorization of intent is needs to be like approved on, or at least start being discussions on, because let's say it's uh, extra regularity here from different perspective, and in different countries the regulation is different. For let's
Mm.
say in Lithuania there is a different payment law, but I believe the concept is everywhere almost the same, that the person authorizes the payment, but there is no description about that the person might authorize variety of payments. There is recurring payments things that we have. This is like a alternative to this. So you authorize each month to take the same amount for some subscription or whatever, or let's say even the amount could be fluctuating, but you authorize some limits. So this is currently the furthest point that we went right now at the moment. But to authorize to act in the area of unknowingness, just to give a goal and intent, this is, I would say, that is not yet regulated on, and it's like a very gray area right now at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Obviously, open banking can sort of help with those variable recurring payments that you mentioned, but obviously, I don't think maybe open banking was initially designed with AI agents in mind and agentic payments in mind. They kind of operate in separate fields. One consent, agreed limits, sort of no reauthentication each time. Um, how do you think though the kind of as a rel that could be something that agentic payments runs on, or do you think it'll be that the agent picks the payee and the amount itself? Do you think that will kind of break the consent model that VIP was built on? How do you see that evolving?
I think the governments, the policymakers, will really we really need some innovative people working in the policymaker segment there to really understand this, because sometimes in the policymakers area there are still legacy thinkers, I would say, at this point, and accepting innovation sometimes it's hard. So but you do not need to be afraid of them. You just need to analyze and dive deep and understand what is the core insight. Yes, maybe there's needed some tweaks, there needed some regulations. We need to somehow still secure the customer, because there also, when there is innovation, there's also potential risk of fraud, potential risk of some incompliance gaps. So it's really need like an expert review here. And but I would say if we are taking the very good and measured steps, I think this is very doable, and it will definitely, break how we look at e-commerce right now. Imagine you just do not need to open anything. You just simply maybe say to your Siri or to your iPhone, no, just get me these eyeglasses. I really like them, but look for them. Do not spend more than 300. That's it. That's your authorization that you gave. It's somewhere tokenized and written in the cryptography key, being as a regulatory approval, that you authorize this payment. From where, when, you don't care anymore. Just, you receive a message that, oh, it's being shipped right now. Please wait a couple of days. And that's it. And the eyeglasses are turned at front door right now. So I would say this is the inevitable future. In the time frame, not sure, are we speaking in terms of 1 year, 2 year, or 5 years? It's hard to say. I mean, the
Yeah.
private sector is ready for this, I believe. The whole thing is regulation.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. And you touched on that, really, isn't it? It's getting those regulations right. And obviously, those regulations differ, as you mentioned, across different markets. Maybe for our listeners and viewers, tell us a bit about the Lithuanian regulatory market, particularly, because many of them may not know too much about that. How does it differ from Europe broadly? Maybe the UK, and obviously, if you look at other big markets, the US, China, they all operate totally differently from that, regardless. But what about the Lithuanian market in particular? Do you think works well? Where does it differ from other countries in Europe and perhaps the EU more generally?
Yeah, so I would say, our regulator, Bank of Lithuania, is right now quite open about the AI in general, and how do they see this, and also, how the regulation is coming through. So they're right now in preparations. They really have an open dialogue with the market participants about this. In general, about the regulation that is currently in place. So let's say compared to the UK, if I'm not mistaken, UK for unauthorized app push payments have 50-50 liability even split from 2024, if I'm not mistaken. Let's say in Lithuania, there is no such thing. There is just authorization, and if you could prove that the person acted very not in the way that he was supposed to do, then the liability could be on the customer side. But customers being considered as a weaker chain compared to the banking institution. So it's usually on the service provider side of this liability shoot. But this I would say this concept is for many of the countries. And speaking about the card payment, so in the European Union economic area, we have for the card payments, we have 3DS security authorization, which is not present in the US, let's say, if we would compare. So we have this liability shift. Let's say usually if the payments are approved by the 3DS, the liability shifts, to the cardholder at the biggest extent, unless there's some critical scenarios and so on. But I would say in general, the regulation, even at supranational level, like the EU AI Act, is also being considered right now in force, and is being regulated at the larger scale. Not yet about the payment itself, but just in general how the AI should be used in the high risk area. So let's say financial industry is definitely high risk area, and that's, I think, the first, as I mentioned, good measured steps about where we might go towards the agentic movement.
Yeah, totally. And you touched a bit earlier on compliance. Obviously, as and when regulation around agentic payments comes in, compliance will be a key part of that. How you maintain compliance with that. Perhaps historically, like compliance has been kind of maybe seen as a reactive force. Fintechs, digital banks, what have you, PSPs get fined and they respond after that. Why do you think things get stuck there in general? Is it because maybe the regulations aren't so clear, or if a fintech's working across different markets, it maybe gets the grey areas are quite fine, so it's hard to discern between certain regulations. Why do you think it's always seems to be a recurring theme, particularly when new
So,
regulation comes
mhm.
in as well?
Yeah. So I mean, like the reactive point. So It's very, very individual here, I would say, at this point.
Mm.
The regulator, the watchdog, when it finds a market participant, so they usually fine for what happened sometime in the history before that, and, oh, you did something wrong like 1 year ago, it's a breach of the law, so right now you have to pay a fine for this. The thing is that the law is written as it's written, and let's say me, I understand it in one way, another company understand it maybe in a little bit different way. So what I wanted to say by that, in law there is, let's say, for example, there's no written, do check a customer for 3 business days. Yeah, it just says, verify the customer, screen him, monitor him, and that's it. How you will do that, this is where the challenge comes in. One company is doing one way, another company another way, and this is usually, one company collects more information, another company collects less information. But if you could defend it, why you collected what you collected, this is what happens usually during the inspections. You just have to open this dialogue and explain to the regulator, why you did this, about what you're discussing right now, and so on.
Sure. Yeah, I guess a part of it is having or building towards compliance in a proactive way, sort of in a preventative way as well, and kind of having those frameworks that you obviously work on as part of your role to kind of ensure that compliance is maintained.
Yeah. So like usually a lot of other market participants, when it's being like publicly announced about some other market participant received a fine, usually you go and see what issues that company had and you try to learn it. I mean, it's the good practice not to learn from other mistakes. It's like proactive action in general. But what we also do, so proactive does not only mean to just do what is being told to be done in the regulation. It's also to optimize the processes here. So meaning that, as I said, you don't have to check the customer for 3 business days. It's nowhere written that. So if I can open account, screen the customer, monitor him, collect information during the 2 minutes, why can I do that? I still complied with you, So
Mm.
this is also the thing where you could innovate. So that's where agentic AI could come in handy at this point. So this is, I would say, the thing where you could defend that, I did the same thing, just, 100 times faster probably. And proactive at this point means that, we also check where we could go wrong and we immediately fix that mistake. So let's say, yeah, with AI, we see that, okay, AI is not understanding, for example, Financial Action Task Force list countries, yeah. So we need to give it to them, because if we will not give it to them, when the Bank of Lithuania would come, we might receive, like a fine for this. So, we need to fix the issue before it's becoming an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned obviously how you could see the AI agents coming in to help. Right now, at present, how much would you personally say there were no rules? I guess hypothetically, how much would you be comfortable with kind of giving over to an agent for things around AML, and how much do you think the human still now needs to be in the loop to kind of, I guess, monitor an agent and obviously be hands on and have that human in the loop as the industry coins it.
Yeah, so basically what we did actually is we just listed, what are the repetitive tasks that we do,
Yeah.
what is very easily explainable. Let's say, from A to Z, it's always the same things to do. So we extracted these processes that, are being always repetitive. It's very simply explainable. It could be written as a procedure and instruction, So we wrote the same instruction and gave it to AI to do these tasks, and so, we could speak about sanction or PEP screening, for example. Yeah, so it's very, very descriptive task to do. You have a person and you have a sanction list. And you have to find if there is a person in that list. And if there are some fuzziness, let's say maybe date of birth is quite missing or not yet provided, maybe hand off this case to the human being to review. But if you cannot find anything on that list, proceed further. That's it. So as simple as it sounds, that's where most, compliance officers can go, or companies could start. These are very simple, repetitive tasks that could be easily done by AI, and there is still a human person being in the loop. Of course, on top, you can do and you must do a quality assurance reviews that, the tool is still working good, and, it's closing false positives correctly, and there are no issues or gaps, at this point. But I would say, take a list what is repetitive, automatize it at some point, and have a human person being on top to do the control.
Yeah, totally. Great stuff, Ignas. Last question for you then, and I think I know maybe what your answer will be regarding what would have to change before I guess agentic payments can run safely. My inkling is that you're going to say, regulation. Maybe the industry's ready and we just need it regulated and the rules to be clear and in place.
Yeah, but I think that what I could propose, to do for other companies, and just to gather the data, where your data currently sits, because there's also an issue that especially, the young companies as we, the fintechs, have their data distributed across separate systems, especially even if they're outsourced, like the monitoring system is by another vendor, onboarding is in another vendor, and your data sits in 3 different rooms. You cannot then do a proper analysis, and you cannot give agentic AI to work on this. So I would say, you have to start creating the core inside, because then if you have the information all by your own, then you can very good, appropriately assess it. And for your own security, I would say that, having everything by yourself inside is, it takes some time. It really takes some smart people to create this. I agree. But find those people, and really create that everything inside, because when you have it, you have the full visibility, you're independent, and you can then, I would say the scale happens at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably also pertinent as well for, I suppose, legacy financial institutions who've got old systems and needing and data in many different places and sort of
Yeah,
needing that, I guess, core infrastructure modernization as well to
quite,
continue, which is
yeah,
still a thing. It's been spoken about for a while, but it's still, I think everyone's getting there slowly but surely.
quite funny. I used to work for not a old bank or something like this, but in my previous employment, so there was quite a legacy system, and I asked for one button, and I had to wait for almost 1-2 years to create just a simple, button at this point, because it takes several IT teams and some, epic tickets to went through and this, and yeah, the system is old enough and you cannot innovate on top. This is the thing that might become in the future a bottleneck for some companies. But I think those big companies have, a lot of funds for expense. They really can do the full renovation of inside core system and restart once again.
Yeah, we will look to see it happen. I guess it will continue to happen over the next couple of years as innovations come out, and as I suppose the need to leverage agentic payments becomes all the more obvious. Ignas, thank you very much for joining us today. Unfortunately, to all our viewers and listeners, that is all we have time for. But if you're not already subscribed to the Payment Expert podcast, make sure to subscribe wherever you do get your podcasts, with plenty more insight and analysis coming over the weeks and months ahead. And for the latest news as it happens, head over to paymentexpert.com. We'll see you all next time.